So what was it that you intended? And the contractor agreement is your best defense to show what you really intended here. Another area would be, did the business owner provide any kind of benefits to the worker? If a worker is on your medical plan or getting retirement benefits from you, that's strong evidence that this really is a traditional employee relationship, because you wouldn't expect a business owner to provide those kind of benefits to a contractor. Another area under what was the intent under that test is, was the contractor hired for a specific project or a specific time period? Because that's usually the case with a contractor. You usually don't bring in a contractor and then have them work an indefinite amount of time. If you're in the situation where you have someone that you've classified as an independent contractor, yet they've been doing work for you for 6 months or a year or even more, and there's really no definitive end, there's no end in sight to this work relationship, you're really at risk for having that person be categorized as a true employee. Now, if that happens, if the IRS comes in or the Texas Workforce Commission comes in and evaluates your situation and decides that you've really misclassified this worker, some of the consequences are that you may owe back taxes for the entire length of time of that relationship. You may owe back taxes, you may owe penalties, and it can affect not only that person, but anyone else who's in the same job function for your company. So it can really add up substantially. It can be devastating for a business owner who has misclassified someone, whether it was intentional or not. So it's an area to really take a close look at with your lawyer or your CPA. One note on this IRS test that we've just been through, looking at behavioral control, financial control, and the intent of the arrangement, is that there are certain categories of workers who the IRS has deemed to be employees, despite these tests. And one example is certain salespeople are employees, no matter what your other arrangements are with them. So be aware that there are some areas that don't fit these tests. I want to move out of the discussion of contractors versus employees, and now let's talk about some of the day-to-day issues that you face, starting out with hiring of employees. One thing that's important to know is that EEOC claims are on the rise. The data from 2008 shows that there was actually a 15% increase in the number of EEOC charges that were filed, complaining of hiring practices or termination practices that people believed to be discriminatory. And you may wonder what the most common type of claim is. And actually, for 2008, the most common type of claim of discrimination was age discrimination. And I believe that's partly because we have an aging population in the United States, so there are more workers than ever who are 40 and over. And also, since we've been in this tough economic period, people who are losing their jobs, even if it was for a completely legitimate reason, people who have lost their jobs often feel like they have nothing to lose. So they are going to file a charge of discrimination if they think there's any chance of recovering from a business owner. Obviously, some of them are legitimate claims, but I just want you to be aware that it's a growing number of claims going to the EEOC, so you may see these type of claims even if you haven't in the past. And there is new funding for EEOC, new agents being hired, so it's an area that will be highly enforced, at least for the next several years. Let's talk about the hiring practices that can help you avoid any belief that there is discrimination behind your decisions. In hiring, the best thing you can do is to standardize your hiring practices so that the way you treat employees as they're being hired or as they're being interviewed is the same for everyone who walks in your door. That means have a standard application form that you've had checked out and you know that you're not asking any discriminatory questions. That means during your interview process, have standardized questions that you ask. And I always advise that you focus on behavioral questions. What that means is you ask the person how they would react in a certain situation, how they would behave if they were given a certain set of facts, rather than focusing on their individual characteristics. You focus on what would they do as your employee, not who they are. So you really don't want to ask questions that could be interpreted to focus on someone's age or on someone's sex. And we'll go through some practical examples in a few minutes of discussion areas that you probably want to avoid in your interviews. One of those discussion areas that can really cause problems is when you meet someone, we all make certain assumptions about people. It's our life experience comes into play. And sometimes we make statements that we don't intend to be discriminatory, but they can certainly be read that way. So it's best if you can really try to avoid making those assumptions, be aware that that is a tendency we all have, and catch yourself if you hear yourself or feel yourself starting to make these assumptions. For example, if you're interviewing someone and it comes up in conversation that this person is a young mother, you want to be very careful not to assume that this person may be unavailable for unusual shift work, for example. You want to be careful about assuming this person may not be able to travel, or this person may use a lot of sick days due to their children's illnesses. Those kinds of assumptions it's easy to be affected by them, and sometimes you're not even aware of it. The problem is that is perfect evidence of a claim of discrimination based on sex. It affects mothers more than fathers. So that's an example of an area you'd want to be cautious of. Let me give you some more examples of conversation that may seem harmless, but it can come back and be very damaging to you if it's brought up by an EEOC investigator. Conversation that we used to have with people as chit-chat can be really concerning. Asking, so do you have kids? Do you have young children, school-age children? Those kinds of conversations you want to just avoid altogether in an interview situation. Categories that might bring out national origin questions, like if you meet someone who has a heavy accent, a question like, so how long have you been in the States? Could be deemed to be a sign of discriminatory intent. Asking about age-related activities. For example, a comment like, this is a really demanding job. Do you have the energy for it? Something that you may feel is completely innocent can be read in a very different way if it's brought in the context of a discrimination charge. So just really edit what you're saying during hiring and be cautious of that.